Okay, so we're on this journey, it would seem,
Definitely a journey.
renewables and zero emissions by 2050. The political argument is that that is moving too fast. If I could take a step back from that and say, okay, so this current government would like to see 100% renewables eventually, I would say. The target's a little bit lower than that, I know. But at the moment, with the technology that we have, is that possible? Or is there just this kind of blind hope that batteries will advance and be the saviour?
It's absolutely possible to get to about 90% with the technology that we have now at a very, very low cost. That last 10%, like the last 10% of any problem, may be a little bit harder. At the moment, the best option for that economically looks like being gas with associated offsets to cover the emissions. It is also possible that if battery technology improves, and it is improving really fast, like the costs of it are coming down really fast, the amount of energy that you can store in any one battery is improving all the time. Those improvements may mean that that last 10% ends up being the last 5%. It also depends on what we can achieve with things like pumped hydro as well. Pumped hydro projects, I think, have not delivered in the way that potentially governments have hoped because they are really, really large construction projects, and really large construction projects tend to run over time and over budget.
Yeah, and why not nuclear? You a fan?
I think nuclear is a bit of a distraction at the moment. I think we've got sort of more immediate problems that we need to worry about. That last 5% is something that we're going to have to deal with in sort of, the mid-2040s.
Yeah, sure, but if you're going to deal with it in the mid-2040s, you need to talk about nuclear now, don't you?
Well, it depends. I mean, I guess the question is, sure, we could, the federal opposition has said they want to take the ban off nuclear power, they could do that. The thing is that there's a hell of a lot of things that would need to happen before you end up with, being able to actually build a nuclear power station. And in the meantime, we've got an awful lot of other stuff that we need to concentrate on building.
Yeah.
I think it's sort of, in some ways it shows that the whole point of net zero is that it's got the word net in it. And that word net means actually accepting that you might have a small amount of emissions and you offset those in some ways, and that actually that's often the cheaper solution.
Yeah.
Focusing on saying that it has to be 100%, I think is probably it's a bit absolutist, and I think that's the same if you're on the far side of the renewables debate or you're on the far side of the nuclear debate.
Alison, if not to question your expertise, but you say renewables is the cheapest form of electricity, and that's where we're headed. But when you take into account the transition and that there is a spike in coal at times like this that we've just seen, and the billions of dollars that is required to update transmission lines, it's not really the cheapest form in the short term, is it? Eventually it will be.
So when I say the lowest overall system cost, that's taking into account the total system cost. The thing is that regardless, that one of the reasons that the coal-fired power stations are shutting down is nothing to do with renewables, right? It's because they're old.
Yeah, they're old.
If we had to rebuild those tomorrow, it would cost us money and that would be quite expensive.
Yeah.
The other thing is that looking forward, we are actually going to all be using a lot more electricity in the future than we are now. We're going to be switching to things like electric cars. We're going to be switching to all electric homes. And that means we're going to have to build generation anyway. So, when we're looking at the total system cost, it really doesn't, you can quibble about which percentage renewables you get and which percentage nuclear and all of that. But the thing is, we are going to have to build a much bigger system, regardless of what that generation mix is, and that means also building much more transmission.
Kind of the bridge here, which has always kind of been talked about as gas, as the best form of energy that is going to bridge that divide between renewables and coal. Is it kind of being demonised unfairly at the moment, and how reliant are we, or should we be, on gas?
So I don't think it's being demonised. I think it's more that it missed the boat. Back in the early 2000s, I think what people thought the pathway was that we would close the coal down and we would replace that with gas while we were waiting for renewables to get cheaper, and then we would replace the gas with renewables. The thing is that renewables got cheap really quickly. and they outcompeted gas for playing that role.
But still
Now,
not as
gas still
reliable,
does.
is that fair to say?
Well, gas does still play a role because it's a generation that you can switch on and off really easily, and that's really useful at peak time. So, those hot summer
We're
afternoons.
always going to need that, aren't we? Unless batteries really do accelerate.
So batteries can play a role at peak times as well. It also depends on how we manage that peak. Like at the moment, we don't manage that peak very well. There's a lot of things that can be done, particularly in the industrial sector, to move things away from that peak so that you're not having to have this sort of sudden spike in energy, which is where the gas tends to come in. So overall, what that means is we're moving to not just a system with more renewables and more variety of generation in it, but a much more sophisticated system in terms of how we manage when and how we use electricity.